Welcome to our latest update highlighting what's happening and changing in relation to employment law and practice. Well, the big news for this update is the Employment Rights Act 2025 is here at last. Surprising and persistent Lord's resistance bears fruit, but there's a sting in the tail. We also report on proposed rate increases for 2026-27 and news that the statutory early conciliation period increases to 12 weeks. Since our last video, the Employment Rights Bill has been returned 3 times to the House of Lords, which, with business support behind them, stood unexpectedly firm, given it is an unelected chamber, and insisted on certain amendments. The most fundamental of these being that unfair dismissal protection would be a right after 6 months, not day one. At the end of November, the government announced its defeat, accepting this sensible amendment so the bill could proceed. So why is this sensible? Well, the proposed statutory probationary period with a lighter touch procedure to dismiss in tandem with a day one unfair dismissal right was always going to create more claims, paperwork and headaches for employers. And, as the Lords kept pointing out, employers would be less willing to take a chance on a candidate as a result, especially the young, inexperienced, or those who had been out of the workplace for a while. After this concession, the insistence of the Lords of the other amendments fell away. But what of this sting? The government included a last-minute amendment on the back of its concession to remove the unfair dismissal compensation cap. After an initial show of disquiet by the Lords, given that this had not been on the cards before, the Lords passed the bill on the 16th of December. The unfair dismissal protection as a 6-month right is now also set to come into force on the 1st of January 2027, earlier than originally planned. This date will apply retrospectively, which means that all employees, existing and new from this date, will only need a 6-month qualifying period to be protected. Royal assent was given on the 18th of December and the final act has published, all 333 pages of it. The government has also produced a somewhat shorter fact sheet which reiterates the timing commitment set out in the original implementation roadmap which we covered in an earlier video. Common commencement dates will be the 6th of April and the 1st of October during 2026 and 2027, although the unfair dismissal protection after 6 months is set to be brought into force on the 1st of January 2027. And of course, there are many trade union changes which apply from royal assent or shortly afterwards. And a quick heads up for the first non-trade union changes which are due to come into force on the 6th of April next year. In particular, these include day one rights to statutory sick pay, paternity and unpaid parental leave. It should be noted that the Employment Rights Act 2025 will also introduce requirement to keep annual leave records for 6 years. This may come into force next April in tandem with the launching of the Fair Work Agency, a new body to enforce employment rights and crack down on non-compliance with new penalties and record-keeping rules. We will cover these and other changes due to come in force then in more detail in future videos. We also have the proposed statutory sick pay and statutory maternity pay and similar rates for 2026-27. It should be noted that in relation to statutory sick pay, as the earnings threshold is expected to be repealed from the 6th of April 2026, from this date, an employee is expected to be entitled to the lower of the set weekly rate, which will be called the flat rate, or 80% of their normal weekly earnings, which will be called the percentage rate. We also have the minimum wage rates for 2026-27, which will apply from the 1st of April of next year. It should be noted that the larger increase for those aged 18 to 20 reflects the government's wish to get rid of the adult age bands, and this is currently being achieved by gradually increasing the rate for those aged 18 to 20 to that for those aged 21 and over. The voluntary living wages were also announced on the 22nd of October, and employers who are signed up to this scheme should implement these rates as soon as possible, but by the 1st of May next year at the latest. And finally, the early conciliation period has increased from 6 to 12 weeks at the beginning of this month. This means that where parties have consented to conciliation, there will be up to 12 weeks for the conciliation process, during which the time limit to bring claims is effectively paused. This stopping of the clock ends once the early conciliation certificate is issued, which will happen at the earlier of the negotiations ending because they are unsuccessful, or the expiry of 12 weeks where there is still no resolution. This change is to give Acas more time in which to provide its conciliation services, but for employers this will lengthen the period of uncertainty as to whether they may ultimately face a tribunal claim. And that's it for this update. And if I may, I'd just like to give a shout out for the 2026 edition of Employment Memo, which we'll publish next month. It is an integral part of Employment Essentials, but can be purchased separately as a hard copy, coupled with a dedicated online product and app. So it only remains for me now to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a festive break. Until next year, goodbye.